All right, guys, we will get started. I don't know if people can shut that door back there. If you're trying to get a seat, just come on in. There's some seats all around over here. You'll have to fill in. Or if you want to grab some chairs from some of the other rooms, there's probably some chairs back in the small conference room if you want to go back there and grab some. There's two right here. One seat right here. Welcome, everybody. So this is FAVOR Greenville's family recovery group, just so you make sure you're in the right place. If you're in recovery and you're here, you're more than welcome to be here. But if you share, we want to talk, you want to share from the perspective of helping the family. Okay, so this isn't a regular recovery group where it's just open to share about what you got going on. It would be, if you share anything, you're sharing in reference for the families. So if you're in recovery, you're welcome to stay. But if you start going off on your own little recovery story, I'm going to tighten you up. Don't hate on me for that. I'm going to tell you that this isn't the appropriate place for that. All right? This is about the family tonight. We like to get together and talk about what it's like to deal with this if you're on the family side of things. We like to talk about different ideas or different options. Every other week we do a lecture like this, and so tonight I have a couple topics that I'm going to go through. I always like to open it up to the group and see if you guys have anything on your mind. So is there anybody that has a hot topic? Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot one thing. Passing this sheet around. See if anybody, if you can give us your name, phone number, and email, all that kind of good stuff. So does anybody have anything that they have on their mind that they want to make sure we talk about tonight? Yes, sir.
To me, it's enabling, and with that relationship with my son who's now in jail, and today I spent a lot of time with his girlfriend, and I'm kind of wondering, it's not a good relationship, it's not a healthy relationship. Any suggestions, limitations, thoughts on that?
Thoughts on what your role should be in a situation like that?
Yeah.
So his question was, his son's kind of in this relationship that he kind of looks at and says, this might not be the best thing in the world. And as a parent or a loved one, where do you come down in that situation, and what can you accomplish in any one of those situations? So when you look at that, it comes down to not really what should you do, it's actually what can you do. Because you're all going to be faced with circumstances where you're like, this is the worst idea in the world. You really shouldn't do that. You really shouldn't go over to so-and-so's house. We know that they're using drugs over there. You really shouldn't enter back into this relationship. It's toxic. You have to ask yourself, will the person actually listen to me? Is it a battle worth having? Pick and choose your battles, that kind of thing. If it's just going to turn into button heads and he's going to get angry because you start saying it, we would recommend you put that one on the shelf. Remember, when you're dealing with addiction, guys, and I'm going to go through this, I'm going to show you, we do this every week when we talk about the brain and we talk about what happens when a person's in addiction. But it bears repeating. When you're dealing with somebody who's in addiction, you're not dealing with a rational person. Very rarely are you going to have a conversation with somebody and they're going to say, you know what, Dad, I didn't think of that. I was wondering whether or not I should continue down that road, but now that you mentioned it, I'm not going to do it. It's not going to go down like that, right? Am I right? So you start to ask yourself, which battles do I get in? When you're dealing with, and you got to remember, that's because the person is not thinking clearly. The part of their brain that involves rational decision making is almost disabled. Now, once they put down the substances, once they start to get into the recovery process, they can start to make rational decisions. But if anybody here has lived with anybody in early recovery, you know that doesn't start happening right away. It takes some time. I like to say it takes some time for the computer system to reboot. It's like a light bulb. It's sort of flickering for a little while before it actually comes on and the person is able to make real good decisions. So we would tell you to tread lightly in an area like that. And focus on the big stuff. Focus on the big stuff. Maybe encourage your loved one to get into a counseling program or into a group program where they're going to get that feedback from other people. So if a person like that came to a meeting that I was at and he said, I'm thinking about getting back in this relationship, I will give him feedback not to do that. And many times people are more receptive to feedback if it's coming from a third party than if it's coming from a family member. Would you guys agree with that? I mean, I've seen situations with my kids where I've heard somebody tell them the exact same thing that I told them, and it was like they had never heard that before. So you want to you want to try to be strategic on how you can make it most likely that the person's going to actually hear you out. Any other topics? Because I'm going to talk more about that as we go through. I'll talk more about how do we address these things, how do we deal with enabling behaviors. But any other topics that you guys might want to make sure we talk about tonight? Yes?
Kind of following up on that, is it a good idea for somebody in short-term recovery to specifically somebody else in short-term recovery?
Great question. So the question was, should people in early recovery kind of get in a relationship together? All right. Here's the deal. Absolutely not. But here's the follow-up to that. I've told 5,000 people not to do that, and I've had 5,000 people ignore me. I've never successfully talked anybody into putting a relationship off. Never. But it's not a good idea. And the reason it's not a good idea is what? You have two people that are trying to negotiate early recovery. Both of them are probably not necessarily, how do I want to say this, emotionally sound at that time. And do you really want to put yourself in a situation where it's like that? Now, I will tell you, if the person's not using it, the person's not actively, going down that road, sometimes it can be positive, believe it or not, because they'll drag the person down the recovery process. So I have seen that, but here's my thing. That would be one of those battles that I don't know if you want to get into. It's almost an unwinnable conversation. You can say it, don't do that, horrible idea, get in a relationship. Rich said it over at Favor. Screw Rich at Favor. I don't care what Rich at Favor said. Rich at Favor doesn't know me, even if I do know him. So, good questions, though. This is who I am professionally, guys. I'm a counselor, advanced degree in psychology, a licensed clinical addiction specialist, that kind of thing. I've been doing this for a while. But I'm also a person in long-term recovery, and I'm also a family member who's dealt with this. So tonight we're going to be talking a lot about it from the family perspective. So I'm going to bring my own personal experience into that along the way and talk about what it was like. One of the things that we like to try to get across, especially if you're early into this family recovery process, especially if you've just started to come to this group, or really to any group, we really want you to get in touch with the idea of this thing being a brain issue. We want to get you in touch with the idea that it's something other than bad behavior. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. The first reason is it's going to help you deal with the person. It's going to help you think through what you want to do in any given situation. It's going to help you not lose your cool when you're talking to the person if you understand that this is something more than just bad behavior. So when I got up and I engaged in my behaviors, when I got up and I pursued these substances, when I put the substances ahead of my family, it wasn't because I was trying to ruin anybody's day. It's because I was on autopilot. And I think it's important for family members to understand that. And the second reason is, if it's a healthcare issue, if it's actually a brain disease, then there's a little bit less stigma, in my opinion. Because I believe that one of the biggest issues associated with this particular with the subject of addiction is the stigma associated with addiction. The way that we talk about each other when we're in addiction, the way the families talk about secrets, and we can't say this to anybody. When I was growing up, you weren't allowed to talk about this. It's only gotten marginally better. So this idea that it's something other than bad behavior, and it's not weak people who become addicted. It's not weak people. It's a brain issue. I like to talk about my own experience. This is a picture of where I grew up. I grew up in, just outside of Pittsburgh. It was an ideal place to grow up. This is called the Ligonier Diamond. This is the diamond. This is what it's like. This is the freaking Stepford village that I grew up in. Everything was perfect. There are no problems in this place. Right? We don't do drugs in a town like Ligonier. Okay? Because it's ideal. I was class president. This is a picture of me back in the day. Way back in the day. This is me winning trophies. And the reason why I'm putting this up here is to try to get you in touch with the fact that I was a pretty accomplished person. That I had a lot of interests. I had a lot of things that I did really, really well. I wasn't kind of just laying there waiting for drugs to kind of take over my life. I had a lot of stuff that... Look at these shorts that they used to make us wear. No wonder I did drugs. So I had all this stuff going on But this is in the 1980s, and nobody talked about substances, and you didn't utter the word alcoholic or addict. You just didn't talk about it. You kept your head down. Nobody ever told me that the number one predictor on whether or not I'm going to develop a problem is age of first use. So I took my first drink when I was 14 years old, and I didn't know this stuff. And a lot of folks, a lot of your loved ones, a similar kind of thing went down with them. And it wasn't because you did anything wrong, or it wasn't because anybody did anything wrong. It was because that's just sort of how it is, right? For some of us, boys will be boys. You're going to take the drink. Today, unfortunately, you're going to pop the pill. Marijuana is not even a drug anymore. So these things are available. If you're too young and you start doing them, that's the number one predictor. And it's important to camp out here for a minute, because a lot of people will blame it on their family in terms of like, it runs in my family. It was our fault. We should have known. Understand it. This is even stronger than whether or not it runs in your family. Do you guys get that? Age of first use is the number one predictor on whether or not you're going to develop a problem. If you talk to people in treatment centers and you ask them how old were when they first started using substances, they're going to tell you around the age of 14. And most of the time, that's peer pressure, right? Peer pressure. Not even really thinking it through. I was highly impulsive. Yeah, whatever, let's do it. You could probably think of your situation, and I bet you they're similar. So as time goes on, you're setting yourself up for those problems. Now, I do want to say one thing. This is not meant to be therapy tonight. This is important. I showed all those credentials and stuff. This is meant to be information, and don't quit going to see your current therapist unless your current therapist sucks. But don't do it because of me, okay? And remember, a lot of people, this is another difficult thing that you're faced with. This is a difficult thing we're all faced with when it comes to dealing with this issue with your loved one's addiction or substance use. A lot of people use, right? If you include alcohol, let's throw alcohol in there. We live in a culture where getting ripped is the norm. Would you agree with that? If you look at this statistic, about 48% of Americans 12 and above like to go at it pretty hard. They call it risky use. If you include risky use and addiction, okay? If you do the math on that, it adds up to right around 48% are currently going at it pretty hard. So when your loved one looks around and you're trying to help him get help, or you're trying to help them go to rehab, or you're trying to help them start attending meetings, or maybe come over to Favor and talk to somebody, and they look at you and say, everyone's doing it, what are you talking about? You're out of your mind, this is no big deal. There's probably a part of them that's telling the truth. Now, it does depend on what the certain substances are. There are subsets of this process where people aren't doing all those substances. But let's just take something like alcohol, for example. You know, a lot of people are drinking, and a lot of people are drinking heavily. Heavily. And so when they look around and they compare themselves, I did this for years. I compared myself to other people who were worse than me. It was easy to find people who were worse than me. So this also makes it difficult. We like to try to think of it as a healthcare issue, guys. We have no preoccupation with trying to get a person to admit, I'm an alcoholic, I'm an addict. We really don't care what you call yourselves. We don't really care how you want to conceive this. It's a healthcare issue. If it's starting to cause problems in your life, if it's starting to affect your health, if it's starting to affect your relationships, if it's starting to affect your schoolwork, if it's starting to affect your experiences at work, it's probably a problem you want to take a look at. This is the way we prefer to look at it at FAVOR Greenville. Now, any questions about that conception? Any questions about that part of the process? Any questions or comments on how to think of this thing? Because the earlier we intervene, the better. So the earlier we start this conversation, the better. So it's really good that you guys are here tonight. It's good that you're getting this information. It's good that you're working your way down this road and you're trying to figure this thing out. Because what I can tell you is the sooner you start some kind of conversation about this issue, the better off you are. I'm not sitting here telling you that means everybody has to wind up in rehab or everybody has to wind up doing a certain program. What I am telling you is you got to start talking about it. Because how are we conditioned to handle this? We're conditioned to what? Wait until they hit bottom. Sit back, wait till they hit bottom. Don't do anything until you absolutely have to. We believe that you want to start thinking of it as a healthcare issue. You don't want to wait for anybody to hit bottom. We got to start talking to kids. Look at this group of kids. They're happy. We just got done talking about drugs in this picture. I talked to them for 45 minutes about don't do drugs. But we did it in a way where it was interactive, where there was no confrontation, there was no scared straight, there was no just say no. It was a real conversation about substances. Now, if you guys are here tonight, you know that this is further down the track. We can't go back. We can't rewind the clock. But the principles are the same. How can we get, for communication and family meetings and the discussion around this, depending on what's going on with your loved one, how can you get to a point where it's okay to talk about this? Does this make sense? This is the goal of what we do at the Favor Groups. How can you get to a point where you can have this conversation with your loved one and it not turn into World War III? How many people, by show of hands, have tried to bring this up with their loved one and it's just gone off the rails and it's gone berserk, right? That used to happen with me all the time. What do people do when you try to approach this? What does the addicted person do? What kind of things how do they react? Anybody got, yes?
Turn it around on you.
How do they turn it around on you?
This is your problem,
You're crazy.
Too controlling.
Yep.
You don't understand.
You need help.
Yeah, yeah.
Rich, you just drove the car into a tree, dude, and you've been out for 4 days. You need help. You need help. And we just say nonsense. Just nonsense. I just want to let you know, I'm going to give you some of the secret moves of the addict. We will just say nonsense. It doesn't have to make sense. The sky is yellow. It's your fault. You need help. You're crazy. What did you say?
We're going to victim mode.
Go into the victim
It's
mode.
the worst thing that's happened to our life.
Yep. Yep. Go into victim mode. Start riding that out as long as we can. What other methods are we going to use to try to deflect this conversation?
Denial.
So that denial thing, that works different for different people, right? So we definitely use denial. Sometimes we just use straight up denial, like, I don't know what you're talking about. What are you talking about? I don't even do drugs. What do you mean? Sometimes we don't use that level of denial, but what do? We sort of minimize it and justify it, tell you that you're not seeing what you're seeing. How many people have experienced that? And how many people have experienced like questioning your own sanity around this issue? Like literally, you will witness a behavior or you will have a conversation with your loved one and you're 100% sure you know what's going on. You're 100% sure you know that they're using again. You're 100% sure that this just happened. And by the time the conversation is over, we will have convinced you that maybe it didn't go down quite the way you thought it did. You know, my wife says that all the time, that one of the biggest consequences of being married to me during my active addiction was she questioned her own sanity. And then when I got in recovery, one of the interesting dynamics that went on was she realized she was right all those times. And she had like this moment of clarity that she was right all those times. And she wanted to kill me in my sleep, I'm sure of it. I used to tell the dudes I went to meetings with, I'm like, look, if I'm not here, send somebody over to my house, man. And look in the backyard, try to look for like a shallow grave or something like that. Because it was very, and what would I do? And I don't know if this is exactly how your loved one does it, but I would venture to guess it's something similar. I would just basically lie and say the same thing over and over and over again when confronted with it, to the point where I believed it. Like there are situations where I think I actually could have passed a lie detector test. If you would have hooked me up to a polygraph and said, Rich, were you doing this or that? I would have answered it and you would have been like, he's telling the truth. Because I think I actually convinced myself of that. Now understand that I was not in my right mind when that was going on. That takes a brain disorder to kind of like get you there. What other techniques does the person use when they're trying to deflect this conversation? There's a couple more I can think of. Yes?
Normalizing it. Like, oh, it's just college.
Minimizing it, normalizing this is no big deal. That's a tough one. Because if they're at college, it probably is a lot of people around them. There probably are a lot of people around them doing it. So normalize. A couple others. Yes, Daniel?
They'll kind of just tell you what you want to hear.
Oh, that's a good one. That's advanced addict behavior there. That's like when you're a ninja addict, that's what you do. You kind of like, it's like reverse psychology. You're sort of like, yeah, you're right, I do need help. You're
It's
right.
legal.
Yep. People also can argue it's legal now. Yeah, you're right. I should get some help. Yeah, you're right. I think I will. Yeah, you're right. And then just what? Continue doing what we're doing. A couple others that you'll see is just straight up avoidance. People will try to avoid the topic at all costs. They'll avoid you. They'll avoid the house. They'll avoid any kind of conversation. And then one of the others, and this is one of the most problematic, is sometimes people will just get straight up intimidating or aggressive. Right? So that can happen. Where when they feel like they're cornered and they feel like this is going to kind of blow up on them, they will lash out at you. So these are all the things that you're going to be faced as you try to talk about this. And the reason is, remember, this is the comprehending the incomprehensible, trying to understand a person who's acting like that, right? That's a key part of this. And this is where all this, these PET scans of the brain can come in handy. This is the brain change that occurs over time as a person uses substances. So this is normal. This is a person who's been compromised. And what happens is over time, as you flood your brain with these substances, the brain will essentially shut off the production of dopamine. It's very similar to what goes on with diabetes. I was at the Greenville Community Health Summit. I spoke there this weekend. And while I was there, there were two topics that they were talking about, guys. Well, three. One was diabetes, mental health, and substance use. And I was there to speak on substance use, but I was listening to the other ones. And listening to diabetes, it sounds identical. Type 2 diabetes. The results are almost identical in terms of outcomes. The results are almost identical in terms of compliance. People taking care of themselves the way they're supposed to. And the pancreas fundamentally changes. It doesn't produce insulin. In this case, the brain doesn't produce dopamine. And I think, this is really hard for people to understand. And so what that does is, you're resorting to this instinctual chasing of the substance to try to feel okay. So you're resorting to this compulsive use of the substance to try to get through the day because you're in this state of mind. Because that's come on to you. And that's all the stuff that makes you scratch your head. Why would they go out and do this? Why would he run out and continue to do that? Even though she knows DSS is coming over and they're going to drug test her, she still continues to use marijuana even though she's going to lose her kids. This is why, guys. So let's camp out here for a minute and see if anybody has any questions. Anybody have any questions about what happens in the brain, how we know this, or anybody have any comments or anything else they want to talk about related to this part of the phenomenon? Because this is a key part of it. Yes, ma'am.
How long does it take a brain that's not being exposed to substance abuse anymore to recover?
I think it takes around 90 days to start coming back online and feeling okay. A lot of that depends on how long you've been using. It depends on what substances you've been using. And it also depends on what you're doing in your recovery process. So if you're going to meetings, for example, and you're around other people, you tend to do better. If you're praying, if you're exercising, if you're eating right, you tend to do better. If you just tried to do recovery by kind of hanging out at your couch at home, it would probably take a lot longer to get there. But I always say 90 days, but it's probably very, very individualized. It's different for different people. Who else had their hand up back there? That was your question? What other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm looking at the word depressed, and I'm thinking, the lower brain activity would require some upper to offset that brain activity, depression. Could you explain
So
that?
this isn't really, it's a great question. Her question or comment was, compare this to depression. So this isn't depression. This is the depletion of dopamine. And so any mood or mind altering chemical will flood your brain with dopamine. So this is, the bucket's empty over here, and you're just looking for anything to pour in the bucket. Do you guys get that? That when the bucket's empty, you're running around, you got an empty bucket, there might be a drug of choice kind of thing going on, but for the most part, let me get a hold of anything that's going to get this going. Yes?
See, because I feel like the same behavior with years without drugs is the same thing once a person gets fixated on something. Especially like you're talking about relationships, that same manipulated, aggressive, victim mode, attack you when somebody's wanting to do something, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
That's why they said there's no cure.
Yeah, so his comment is that you can also replace this with other things. You can also get in this situation where you're chasing something external to try to feel better. And I do believe that's true. Now, I'm of the opinion, and I can't sit here and tell you that I'm 100% correct about this, but I'm of the opinion that substances take it to a whole nother level. That going after substances take it to a whole nother level as compared to, although I've known some people that were in relationships that got really, really addictive and got really, really problematic. But remember, when you're putting this stuff in your body, let's just say you're taking pills that you shouldn't be taking. When you're taking these pills, man, you literally are flooding your brain with dopamine. I mean, you are overflowing your brain with dopamine. Can the same thing happen with other behaviors? Absolutely. I think, like, you'll hear people talk about, I'll tell you a big one now that I get a lot of phone calls in my private practice is for internet addiction. I get a lot of phone calls for internet addiction, and people talk about the process when they're logging on the computer or they're getting ready to get on the game, especially those games that are social. You guys know what I'm talking about? Like, there's actually internet games where you're playing with other people. I know y'all out there who played Pong and Space Invaders have no idea what I'm talking about. But bear with me, trust me, they are there. You get on, and while you're on your headset, and you're talking to somebody in Seattle, Washington, and somebody in, the UK or whatever. Those games are incredibly addictive. But I don't think that they flood the brain quite the same way as, like, methamphetamine or heroin or something like that. But it's a good point. Yes, sir.
Question. With alcoholics, sometimes the people will use the term, well, he's a happy drunk or he's a nasty drunk.
Yeah.
It seems to change.
That's a great question.
It takes an average person, and for some reason, some people will become, they're just giddy and happy, and other people become downright nasty. How about...
You know what, I have to be honest, I don't quite understand the dynamic of that, but I definitely think there's something to that, right? And then there are some people that will act differently depending on the alcohol they're drinking. So there are some people that could drink 40 beers and not punch anybody in the face. And then there's this guy over here who does 2 shots and wants to fight everybody in the bar. I don't know what the dynamic is. They're trying to do a lot more work around the brain. I'll give you an example. So there are some people who are much more receptive and susceptible to opioids. This is what we're finding out. So when you think about opioid addiction, it's not an equal opportunity offender. Not everybody in this room would become addicted at the same level where opioids are concerned. And maybe some of you have had this experience. There are some of you in this room who've probably taken pain pills and you didn't even really like them. You may not have liked the way they made you feel. My wife, not only does she has no risk of becoming addicted, she actually can't stand the way she feels when she takes them. What we're finding is that there are some folks that it fits like a puzzle piece. So when I took opioids, it literally gave me a euphoria. It actually drove me up when I took them. And the idea is that my brain is just wired differently, and that happens to be the substance that I'm receptive to. You could also say the same thing maybe for people who are receptive to, like, a central nervous system stimulant. There are some people who are drawn to uppers. And then there are other people who can't stand the way they make them feel. So everybody's brain reacts differently. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution or proposition. Now, what I can tell you is when you get here, you're going to pour anything in that bucket that you can pour in there. You're going to compulsively seek these substances. That's why the person will look you in the eye and say, I'm done, I'm not doing this anymore. And then by 2 o'clock that afternoon, be out running around selling your silverware. Well, I don't know if you sell silverware. Can you? Yeah, it's got to be good silverware, though. Somebody stole all the spoons out of my kitchen.
Right.
I'm not kidding. All the spoons are gone from the FAVOR kitchen. I'm very upset about this. Very troubled. Any other comments? Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if the recent research shows that marijuana is addictive, because it's always been said, yeah, it's a gateway drug and it's not that addictive, blah, 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 blah. I mean, I'm just confused about the research now.
Marijuana is addictive without question. Hubert, can you turn that air conditioner down before I fall over and die?
Well, you still have your coat on.
I know. Yeah, it is addictive. It's addictive in about 10% of the folks who use it. So even people who are pro-marijuana will tell you that it is addictive. It's not a completely non-addictive substance. 9 or 10% are what the studies say will become addicted, dependent on marijuana in the classic sense, putting it ahead of everything else, destroying their life in terms of work, in terms of school, that kind of stuff. The argument with marijuana isn't that it's not addictive, it's that it's not dangerous. and meaning that people can't overdose and stuff like that. And I'm actually going to talk a little bit more about that. Yes?
I just wanted to know how you felt about, say, antidepressants when they're going through that period.
So antidepressants, it's a great question. Her question was, how do antidepressants affect the brain when you're going through that period? Antidepressants aren't going to negatively impact the recovery process in any kind of way. And so we would say if a person needs to be on antidepressants, then they should be on antidepressants. It's not a mood or mind-altering chemical that's going to flood your brain with dopamine. It doesn't affect dopamine at all.
Is it going to help?
It could, but it won't help that part of the process. It would help a depression part of the process. If a person is truly depressed and addicted, we would say yes. But it won't help this part of the process. As far as we know, guys, the only thing that helps with this part of the process is a recovery process. Is actually some time without putting a substance in your brain so that your brain can re-regulate. It has to re-regulate, right? It has to get back online, all that kind of stuff. And then as you're working a recovery process, you start to feel better. People always say to me, well, why don't they just give me something that puts dopamine in my brain? And I'll be like, hold on a second, dude. Let's think about this. That was the original problem, right? Those pills I was taking just put dopamine in my brain. That weed I was smoking just put dopamine in my brain. That alcohol I was drinking just put dopamine. So they haven't found a solution to that in that regard. Some people think that those of us who became addicted were actually born with less dopamine. This has never been proven. This is a theory. It's called the dopamine deficiency hypothesis. That if 10 is the normal scale, I was born in an 8. So therefore, when I used substances, I had a greater payoff. That's one of the theories that's out there. And that's why some people become addicted more quickly or more susceptible. And that's kind of like the hereditary factor part of this. But that's never been definitively proven. I always say I want to get I've said this before, I want to get a PET scan, get a machine that we can take pictures of people's brains at FAVOR, right? Just because that would be incredibly fun. We'd slam them through there over and over again. They'd be like, put me through again, put me through again. But this is, we really don't have this ability on any kind of wide scale, but I guess this would be as close to like proof that the brain is changing. Any other questions about that or comments? Yes?
How many times can a brain do that before you have brain damage?
So you never have permanent brain damage from this. You can recover. You can always recover. There is a condition with alcohol called wet brain where you can suffer permanent consequences, but it's not related to dopamine. You will always come back from this. Done rehab 20 times, do it the 21st time, you can come back. You can always come back. It might take longer. It takes longer if you're older, for example, that kind of thing. One of the things about young people, people always talk about, we got a lot of young people in recovery. That's tough. They're so young. They're in recovery. But the cool thing is their brain bounces back real quick. Their brain bounces back real quick. So they can get right real quick. Y'all can get right real quick. Yes.
So, with the pills like the opioids, the dopamine doesn't stay in the brain like for what, a couple hours, 4 hours?
Yeah, I think it would be like that. I don't know what the half-life is on different substances, but yes, and it'll leave your body, it'll leave your system, absolutely. But then this is depletion, guys, because you keep flooding it over and over again. This doesn't happen the first time you do drugs either. You have to do this, a few times repeatedly before it gets there. Anybody else need to sign this? Okay. You might be the only one. All right. All right, and we've talked about this before. I'm not going to go into great detail in terms of the different criteria. You're looking for a pattern of these behaviors over any 12-month period. A pattern is a subjective thing. It means it has to happen more than once. And if they meet 6 of those criteria, or if you're like me, if you get all 11, I was an overachiever in this regard. If you get all 11, you meet criteria for substance use disorder severe. And that is as close as we can kind of get to defining this thing. Any questions or comments about that? Any questions about how do you know whether the person's addicted or anything like that? All right. So what do we need to do? So what are we going to do? We want to have these honest conversations. And here we go. Somebody was asking questions about marijuana. We got to start. We got to talk a little bit about marijuana. I don't want to go into great detail. So marijuana, believe it or not, is still a drug. Okay? It actually is. Even though it's legal, even though it's medicine. You guys aren't going to object to that? It's still harmful. Somebody asked the question of, is it addictive? Yes, about 10% of the time. But it's not this stuff. Anybody remember Reefer Madness? When they told us that if we smoked a joint, we were going to jump out windows, we were going to attack people, become violent, that kind of stuff. So this is the problem. For years and years, we told people that marijuana was going to kill you, that your head was going to explode, that you're going to do all kinds of things, that you're going to hold up the bank, rip off the convenience store. And then they find out that none of that's true. Not only that, it's actually medicine, according to a lot of people in the public. And so now what you have is you have what? The complete erosion. When young people look at me and I try to tell them that marijuana is harmful, they look at me like I'm full of crap. Okay? So, and this is the graph that kind of indicates where we're at. This is perceived risk. When they ask people, do you think this is dangerous? And if you look at the orange line, you can see how perceived risk, this is like the counter, this is like the hippie age, when y'all were at Woodstock and stuff like that, right? Yeah, don't make eye contact. All right, so over time it starts to change, okay? Perceived risk, it starts to go up, kind of like peaks in the 90s. See, I was brought up in the just say no, your head's going to explode. I thought it was bad. Well, I didn't, but my classmates did. Okay? And then what happened? They start this campaign, and now you can see, and if you took this out further, it's less than 10% of students think it's a risk now. Okay? Less than 10% of students. So even the kids who aren't doing it don't think it's a problem. You guys get that? Mm-hmm. So what this has done is it's a whole culture shift. It's a 100% culture shift. And I'm not saying this is about marijuana. What I'm telling you is this is the mentality around all substances. Because it becomes a trickle-down effect, guys. Or a slippery slope. How about that? Would we agree with this? So they told us marijuana was bad. Marijuana is not bad. So what happens is the use goes up, perceived use goes down. But the real problem is what does that do in terms of these other substances? So if we're dampening everything down, what it does is it also makes other substances less threatening as well. Do you guys get that? So we got to wrap our mind around the fact, and this is why it's so important for you guys to be here, for parents and loved ones to be here, because these conversations have got to start happening, because we can no longer wait until they get in front of a school counselor, or they get in front of they get a DUI and they wind up in a program or something. We can no longer wait because of this fact. So this is the lethal amount of fentanyl. And we've talked about this in here before. That's a pinch that can drop you. And the other thing is it's fake pills. So what you got is on the top is the counterfeit pill, on the bottom is the real pill. All right? And what they're doing is they're filling this with fentanyl. These are the conversations that even if your loved one doesn't want to get help, even if they don't want to do meetings, even if they don't want to go to rehab, is there any way that they can get in front of anybody and hear this information? If this is the type of stuff. So I'm thinking, let's just talk about the person who likes to do heroin, the person who likes to take pills. They need to understand this reality. Do you get where I'm coming from? Even if it doesn't mean that you're going off and you're going to go live happily ever after and you're never going to use substances again, we've got to be conveying this information. People need to be informed on that fact. That's why I put it in this, guys. That's why I put this in. This isn't a prevention group or anything like that, but I want you all to know what's going on with these substances. Does anybody have any questions about this? Or any clarification?
I guess mine, okay, so they go to rehab after rehab and they sit through it. I mean, my son's been in 6 now. But he's got people that that have been into rehab with him that turn right around and they've been clean for 3 years or 6 months or 90 days or whatever. But the addiction is so strong, even though they know that, why do they keep going back to it? I mean, you wonder if it is that powerful.
So I think her question is great. If they know that it's that dangerous, why would they go back to it? If somebody knows that we live in an age where you're mixing this stuff, why would they go back to it? You could say the same thing for the person who has a drinking problem and they've been told that their liver enzymes are high. Why would they go back even though their liver is going to go? It's because of this, guys. It's because of this brain stuff. It's 100%. When you say powerful, absolutely. Absolutely. The psychological craving around this issue. And if you're not being honest in your recovery process, and if let's say you go to rehab and you go through the motions, and you're not really telling the counselors how you feel, and you're sort of just going through the motions because you know the drill, you're going to come out with that. You're still going to have that desire, that thing in the back of your mind. And remember, the other thing is that it's not going to happen to you. You simply tell yourself, this isn't going to happen to me. We have our hospital overdose response program, and we frequently have people who leave there, actually almost all the time, except when we're actively intervening, they leave there and they continue to use after they were just saved from an overdose. So remember, it goes back to this, guys. There's absolutely zero logic involved. Your question is outstanding. I don't know if you all could hear her question. Why would they go back and do that? Even if they know that they could die from it, or even if they've been to rehab 6 or 7 times, because it goes beyond logical explanation. And what they need to be doing is they need to be exploring this with therapists, and they need to be exploring this with people in recovery. They need to be saying, there's something going on. If a person goes to rehab and they leave and they're getting high directly after that, what went on in rehab was useless. There's something not being talked about in that rehab experience if it ends that quickly. I mean, I understand people will relapse, 60 days later, 90 days later, but if it's 2 weeks later, something is mightily wrong with that experience. Yes?
Would you please talk just for a second about the difference between an individual therapist that's separate from the kind of interactions that happen in a group? Because, I think some people think that coming to FAVOR groups or AA groups is a substitute.
So we would say that people need both. So her question was, what about individual contact versus group contact? Our thing would be do both of those, but absolutely there's a huge difference, right? When you're one-on-one with somebody, you can kind of get into some stuff that you wouldn't get into in a group. I know I'm not going to share everything that I got going on in a group. Also, when you're in a group setting, you tend to follow the expectations of the group. So if the whole group is just sort of saying, yeah, I'm not going to use anymore, I don't have any desire to use, when it comes to me, I'm much less likely to say, I really want to get high. But when I'm with an individual person, I might be likely to go ahead and bring that out. So we would say, a person should have both those services. They should be in groups, because you can also get some valuable stuff from groups. Like when you're in a group, you get to hear everybody's opinion. When you're in an individual, you only get that one person's opinion. So we would say do both. But we're a big proponent of that one-on-one relationship. I know I had that. And what other questions about these pills or this process? Yes, ma'am.
This question has come up a couple of times in conversations that I've had with people. Why do drug dealers want to put fentanyl in the drug to kill the people that they're selling?
Why do drug dealers want to kill their customers? That's the question. They don't want to kill their customers. They're trying to make it more powerful. They're trying to make it more powerful, and they're trying to cut their product and get more of their product out there. So it's simply like fentanyl is highly, highly, highly addictive, very, very powerful. If I put it in there, I can get more bang for my buck, and people will keep coming back to me because I have a satisfied customer. They're not trying to kill anyone. A lot of times they'll say that these accidental overdoses are the cost of doing business. It was an accident. We wish it wouldn't happen, but hey, we're just trying to get business. Yes, ma'am.
Latest Surgeon General report. How does that work? I mean, how do you know when to give that shot?
Narcan.
Yeah, Narcan.
So Narcan is an overdose reversal drug. You give it when the person is out.
Yeah. But you walk up to a young person and they're out, so you just...
Well, you can't. There's no harm if you give it.
Okay.
Nothing bad can happen. So yeah, when in doubt, hit them with Narcan. But Narcan in South Carolina isn't widely distributed yet.
Well,
So, the Surgeon General has just come out and said Narcan should be available for everybody. That we should be able to walk in and say, I have a loved one dealing with this. That's not the case in South Carolina just yet. Actually, I'll take that back. I've been told that if you go to your pharmacist, you can get it. If you go to your pharmacist and you say, you can't get it over the counter, but if I go and say, my name's Rich Jones, here's my insurance, I need this, I'm dealing this with my family or with my friends, that they will get me
That's what we're
Narcan.
talking about with showing the penny. I mean, that's what we're trying to keep
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah,
so-
exactly. Any other questions about this part of the process? Yes, ma'am.
Just to add on that, the Narcan is not cheap even with insurance.
No, it's $200 some bucks, right? So it's not a cheap thing.
The way I
$200
read
some
it,
dollars.
It was sort of like everybody needs to have Narcan on them in case they, I mean.
Well, you guys, this is a great point. Like she's talking about, the Surgeon General said everybody should have Narcan. That's because in some states, guys, it will blow your mind how many people are overdosing and dying from this. Like, we haven't actually seen the problem in South Carolina. We haven't seen this issue come to South Carolina yet. If you look at where he's, when he's talking about that, he's talking about those New England states. He's talking about West Virginia, that kind of thing, where literally you could come across somebody overdosing at any given point in time. Any other questions or comments about that process? Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
just going to make a comment about the marijuana being a gateway drug. I know we've kind of talked about it in the meetings before, and I've been thinking a lot about it, and I thought about how my son, probably at the age of 14, run with some kids in the neighborhood. They were really smoking pot, not drinking, not doing anything else. Later on, they got into Xanax. But the thing I got to thinking about, if 14, 15 years old, they're smoking marijuana to get that high feeling, and every time something happened at school, maybe, they failed a test or there was some kind of stressful situation, and they keep going back to the pot, I think that eventually they don't know how to live life and handle the daily life as they move forward and as they grow up. So they just go from one drug to another drug to drinking to Xanax. It just
And here's what I can tell you. You're absolutely right. That happens. You become habituated to this is how I cope. But even a lot of those folks don't become addicted in the classic sense where the brain changes. Do you guys get that? So, and it's still bad because they can't do life, but they're typically going to have an easier time to stop. I know people like that, man. I know people that I went to high school with and people I hung out with and went to college with that were like absolutely 100% over the top, but their brain didn't actually flip. And so whenever circumstances changed, they got a girlfriend, they got married, they got a job they really wanted, they just stopped. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
So it was dangerous what they were doing, but it wasn't that classic kind of like addiction. When I got to that point in time where my life was at a point where I should stop, I wanted to stop, but I couldn't. I couldn't because I got into that cycle where I literally couldn't go without it because my brain was in that state that I just showed. It's a great question. Don't get me wrong. The scenario that you're describing is not good because that person can wind up, being hurt very, very badly too. But it's different than if the brain changes. Yes, ma'am.
So what is the cause of the depletion of the dopamine? Is it the taking of the drugs where the brain says, well, I don't need to provide dopamine anymore, and then you're...
Yeah, technically what it is...
Or is it a physical, genetic kind of...
So there's a genetic predisposition. So some people are more vulnerable for their brain to do that, okay? I was more vulnerable for my brain to do that. But what happens is as you flood your brain with dopamine over and over again, let's say I'm taking heroin, I'm taking these pills, boom, 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 I'm flooding my brain. It's dangerous. It's literally dangerous. The brain literally re-regulates itself and says, this isn't good, and shuts off the production altogether.
So initially, if we get them early enough,
You could get them on track better and quicker. Her question or comment was, if you get involved earlier, it's like any other disease. The earlier you intervene, the better. You don't want to wait for stage 5 cancer to do something about it. You want to try to get it early on. Yes, sir.
I just had a comment. As people were talking, it kind of came into my mind. Speaking from my own personal experience, I know that in high school, which was really obviously kind of when for me personally, my behavior ramped up before college. I know that in my junior and senior years of high school, boredom or too much free time for me had a huge factor. And my senior year, I didn't have to go into school until 10 o'clock because you don't have as many classes, and I'm out of school by 2.
Yep.
And I'm at that point. I'm a teenager. I can drive. I don't need to be home till so I have all day to sit around and do nothing.
Yep.
and it's a lot easier to play video games for 10 hours if you're on whatever.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, he's making a great point. I'm glad he brought it up. Let's get one thing straight. The substances actually do serve a purpose, right? Like the first time I got high, it wasn't like getting tasered or anything like that. It was pretty pleasurable. And it took up the day and it filled boredom. And so it's kind of to your point, people use it and they get a payoff for it. So that's why they go back for more. It's like any other human behavior. Why do we do this? You know, we do the behavior. Why do we go back and do the behavior again? Because it was pleasurable. It was enjoyable. The problem is for some of us, and in my case, I know it happened to me, at some point in time, it went from the payoff to this other thing, this dependency on it. And that's the part, again, I don't want to minimize the person who's using just for the payoff, because you can die from that too. Let's get that clear, right? There are people who die, let's use this example. There are people who die in drinking and driving accidents that were never addicted to alcohol. Would you agree? Yes. It happens all the time. That kind of thing. So I'm not minimizing that experience. What I'm just telling you is that that's something different. That's something different. And that's when you get into that compulsive insanity. And that's when you get into that situation where it seems like nothing you can do can get the person to think clearly. That's because their brain has changed. But it's all important stuff to recognize. But to your point, the earlier we intervene and the earlier we have the conversations, the better. And this is just something that we're now talking about. Remember, most of you in here that are dealing with a loved one, to a certain degree, you got faulty information by the system. Because you were basically told, wait till they hit bottom. Not everybody in here. Some of you your kids are young enough that you weren't told that. But the overall story that I was told was, wait till it gets bad enough. He'll come and get it. That's literally what they said about me. Wait till Rich guy, hey, literally, you know what they would say? Like, go out and do a little bit more experimentation. Come back when you really want it. That was a common thing that was said. And so, if you've gone through that, understand that you were sold a bill of goods. It's just not true.
They're still saying it.
They still say that certain places, yes, but it's getting less and less. And you have folks like us that are saying that that's very, very ill-conceived and very inappropriate. Whereas in the 80s and 90s, it was just hands down the only way you did recovery was if you were, completely 100% broken and, oh, please help me, please help me, please help me, begging for help, then you could get help. That has got to change, and unfortunately it is changing. Did anybody? Yes, sir.
Talking about getting high, my son would say further on in his using that it made him feel normal.
Yes.
Yeah, you'll hear that phrase a lot. Great comment. It goes from a party to feeling normal. So let's go on. Like, what can you do if you're dealing with this? So you can do nothing and hope for the best. Okay? That is an option. You can absolutely do that. You can cross your fingers and hope for the best. Pray. You can start talking about doing an intervention, but remember, an intervention is a very serious commitment. One of the issues that we're having at FAVOR Greenville is we have a lot of people that say they want to do an intervention, but they don't really want to do an intervention. And I completely understand why they don't want to do an intervention, because an intervention comes with what? Very serious consequences that you're going to have to say to your loved one. Usually something like, if you don't go to rehab, you're going to have to leave. Or if you don't go to rehab, I'm no longer going to pay the rent. You're going to be homeless. Do you guys follow me? So what we've gotten ourselves into is we've gotten into this situation where a lot of people are putting their foot in the intervention pool. And they're like, oh, that's too cold. I'm not quite ready for that. And we respect that, but don't say you want to do an intervention unless you're sure you want to do an intervention. And let me tell you, if you do an intervention, it's going to hit the fan, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying the person's going to lose his mind or anything like that, but it's going to get uncomfortable. You're going to have to sit there and say, listen, Johnny, here's the deal. If you don't go with Rich to rehab, then you're going to have to leave my house. You can no longer stay here. You cannot be here. That kind of thing. Now, you can do family meetings, and it doesn't have to be that intense. You can do family meetings where you try to get everybody on the same page and sit down with the person, and it doesn't involve consequences or bottom lines. You guys follow me? I believe in family meetings. I believe in starting the conversation and say, we're not sure what we're going to do. We're thinking about doing an intervention. I've seen that kind of get a person moving. I've actually seen family members, especially if they can get everybody on the same page, and we've talked about that in here before, That's the key thing, right? Getting all the key players on the same page. Mom, dad, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, sometimes employers, sometimes brothers, sisters. If you get enough people on the same page, you might be able to get it done via a family meeting. That kind of thing. The other thing, and this is what I'm going to talk about for the remainder of tonight, the other thing that you can start doing is you can just start concentrating on yourself. You can say, I'm not ready to do an intervention. I don't have anyone else to do a family meeting with, so I don't want to just hope for the best, so I'm going to start working on myself. And I know that's one of the things that's very, very counterintuitive for families. How is that actually going to get anything done? How's that going to accomplish anything? And it comes back to family systems theory, guys. If you look at like this idea of, if you talk to a family therapist, there's different ways of looking at how the family works. One is called family systems theory. And it's this idea that we fall into our roles and into our behaviors in any given family, and we continue those roles in our behaviors. And if one of us changes, it impacts the other people in the family. It's like a baby's mobile. If I move this little green freaky thing here, what is that?
Dinosaur.
Staphylococcus or whatever it is. If I move it, it also moves this red freaky thing and this blue thing. Right? If I move one part, and so the idea would be if you start working on yourselves, that you actually ultimately could impact the person. And then the second part of it is, it's also going to help you not lose your own mind. Because dealing with a loved one's addiction will drive you crazy. I don't know if you guys know the impact that you're going to experience as you go through this. And anybody can speak up. Yes, ma'am.
So do you support Al-Anon? Do you support people
Yeah,
going to Al-Anon?
absolutely.
The recovery that they need to
Yes. That would be a group that we would absolutely support. Her question was, do we support Al-Anon? And the answer is yes. Suzanne's probably going to leave here in a couple minutes to go to Al-Anon. She cheats on me every Monday with Al-Anon. It really hurts, too.
But that was set up for people who were family members of an addicted person.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the different things, but one of them is definitely groups. Groups are very, very helpful. Were you going to say something? Okay. Anybody else have a comment about this part of the process? Yes?
I've learned, I'm a stepmom, but I've learned that in the family, it's sometimes very difficult because there are some people in our family that have connected with our addicts.
Yeah.
And we are worried here on the sideline. Now they're saying that we are negative.
Yes, and this goes back to this whole idea of identifying a team and finding out who's on the team and who's not on the team. And I don't know if you guys could hear the comment, but as you try to work on yourselves and you try to approach the addicted person differently, as you try to change your role in the system, many times people will push back on you, and you will become the problem. You will become the person who's too hardcore. You will become the person who's just mean. You're just mean. That kind of thing. As you try, because remember, what is the purpose of a system? Think of any system, whether it's a family system, the educational system, our drug and alcohol treatment system. What's the purpose of the system?
Everybody follows the same rules.
It's ultimately for the system to survive. A system exists so that the system can survive. All we really want to do is just keep doing what we've been doing. That's what a system is, by definition. Whether it's good or bad doesn't really matter. You know, that's why you can have, in certain parts of our country, you can have public school systems where 75% of people flunk out of school. It doesn't matter what the results are. The system exists to perpetuate itself. That's the same thing in a family system. It exists, and the main goal is to keep it all, hey man, it might not be good, but we're going to keep doing it this way. So all of a sudden you start pushing back, and maybe, so-and-so, or all of a sudden you start to change, and so starts pushing on you because he doesn't want anything to change. They don't want anything to change. There are all these subconscious processes that are going on. But, yes, ma'am.
What do you do when it gets to that point? Like right now, I'm
So
in the chair where I'm
Well, this is why we say work on yourself. This is a great question. What do you do if you don't have a team? Then you start working on yourself. You literally start working on yourself, and because it's the only thing you can do. Does that make sense? Sometimes this is the only thing you have left to do. Would you guys agree with this? Yes. You don't have the option of putting together a team to do something. Sometimes you don't have any leverage over the person whatsoever. They may not even live with you. They may live in a whole different state. That kind of thing. If they're married, let me give you this example. If they're married and their husband or wife has a different view than you do as a parent, it doesn't much matter what you think. If their boyfriend or girlfriend has a different view, it doesn't much matter what you think. Sometimes even if their friends have a different view, it doesn't matter much. You're left with no choice but to say, how can I start taking care of myself? Now, what I'm here to tell you is I believe that still actually impacts the person. Because I believe that the system is so enmeshed and so entrenched in a person that they will notice differences in your behavior. And they will wonder what's going on, and that's all you can do, and that may get their wheels spinning. And you'll see different programs handle it differently. So when I was in Pennsylvania, we had a lot of programs that were 100% family-oriented. You didn't do anything with the individual person. You only ever saw the client in a family setting. Imagine that. There was no such thing as individual drug and alcohol rehab. There was no such thing as you're just going to go work on your recovery. Every single thing was done in a family setting. This was very hard. This is very hard to do. Anybody know why this is so hard to do? Oh, it's very hard to do as the therapist. Let me tell you something. I used to think I'm going to wear a helmet when I go in here. But it's also very hard to do from a systemic point of view because it's relatively expensive and it takes a lot of time. Over here you have like traditional kind of like drug and alcohol, which is Rich, go get clean. You know, Melissa, go over here and work on yourself, but you don't need to really get together, just go your own ways. We'd like to think there's something in the middle, so that's kind of how we think of ourselves, okay? Because we don't have the manpower to do this, but we think it needs to be something different than that. And when I say working on yourself, I would think of it this way. So, of course, you can go to, someone mentioned Al-Anon. If you go to an Al-Anon program, they're going to have a very specific set of protocols and steps that they want you to follow, literally steps. If you go to a Nar-Anon program, they're going to have steps. I'm going to talk about it in more generality. Does that make sense, guys? I think that you can get through these issues through Al-Anon or Nar-Anon, but I'm not going to talk about it that way. I'm going to talk about what are the areas that you generally can work on in your own life. I would say worry, anxiety, and stress. I would keep it that simple. That manifests itself in all kinds of other ways, like throwing coffee cups at people. Just kidding. No, I'm not. You guys do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I got a coffee cup thrown at me every once in a while. Frustration, anger, problems at work, distractibility, all the never sleeping at night, all those fall under one of these categories. This is my way of thinking of this. We could spend all night talking about every different scenario, but let's talk in more generalities. All right, so what is anxiety? Here's where I'm going with this. If you understand what's going on with you, and you have a clear understanding of what anxiety is and what worry is, sometimes knowledge is power. Okay? So anxiety is actually a positive thing. If you look at like an emerging discipline is called evolutionary psychology. And so how did the human way of thinking develop over time? It was actually very, very useful to be anxious back in the day when the world was pretty dangerous, right? The people who were chilled out were getting eaten, or getting hijacked, or getting killed, or a mammoth was stepping on them, okay? It was very, very useful in an unsafe world to be anxious. Now understand, in the big picture scheme of things, in terms of human history, we've only been relatively safe for about the last 100 years. If you look at things like, people used to die in massive amounts in war. How about World War II, World War I? How about wars before that? How about people dying from disease, viruses, starvation? It was a relatively unsafe planet until about the last 100, 150 years. So our brain is very, very used to finding something wrong. Do you guys get that? We are hardwired to notice the negative. And we are hardwired to prepare for the worst case scenario because it kept us alive. But now, for the most part, we live in a relatively safe world in terms of our physical health. Most of us know where we're going to get a meal tonight. Most of us know we're going to be okay when we go home. So our brains are going to find the psychological threats, the potential emotional threats. Does this make sense? And that's what anxiety is. In addiction, hands anxiety something to jump on. Would you agree? So it's like your brain is already wired to find something to worry about. And here comes your loved one. Here comes your son with an active addiction. Here comes your daughter with an active addiction. Your husband, your wife. Man, it's like, okay, I'll take this from here, Rich. You're not going to go to sleep tonight, but just sit back and let me handle this. And what happens? All the scenarios. How many people in here know how to run a scenario? You guys know what I mean by that? Person didn't text you. Text message didn't come in. Boom, 0 to 60. Here's what could be going on. All these different scenarios. So, and it's game on. And so what it's about, guys, is if you get into this, what you have going on is the thinking part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain where you can have a logical conversation with yourself. That's not nearly as important as the instinctual part of your brain. Think about it this way. In terms of like priorities, this is how it works. This part of your brain is always given the main priority because this is the part where all the involuntary functions, your heartbeat, your breathing. So this is the most important part of your brain. This is the second most important part of your brain because it keeps you alive. You eat when you're hungry. You run away when you're scared. Does that make sense? This is the least important. You don't really need to contemplate life to stay alive. So it'll always win out that way. So the amygdala, or the fear-based part of your brain, will always win the day unless you find a way to override it with your thinking part of your brain. You guys getting this? Yeah. So in any given situation, you are going to be triggered, and your first response is going to go with worst-case scenario thinking, highly anxiety-laden. I had this happen the other night to me, just bouncing from situation to situation. I was up from like 2 till like 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like literally laying there thinking like, my amygdala is running the show right now. You know? And I got to tell you, nothing happened. I was unable to like redirect my thinking. I was unable to calm down. It just got the best of me. But I went to like every possible bad scenario that could happen. And then for me, what happened was it even went beyond the bounds of what originally started the issue. I started worrying about finances. I started worrying about favor. I started worrying about all kinds of different things that didn't have anything to do with the first topic. And that's because I tapped into this part of my brain. This is also called the fight or flight instinct. And the fight or flight instinct is unconscious. So this is always going to win unless you learn how to use this part of your brain. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this. And even if you know how to do this, this is still going to be hard from time to time. And sometimes it's not going to work. And also remember, the reason why your amygdala is winning is because many times the fear is actually legitimate, right? That's the other thing we have to acknowledge. You're not overreacting many times. So this is kind of a graphic that we made that can sort of show you, it's like all these experiences that you have go through a filter of past experiences and preconceived ideas and preconceived experiences. And you know, this person's not attending meetings. They're not responding to texts. This is a kid. His grades are falling. It's going to go through this filter, and out the other end comes all these feelings of despair. All the negative outcomes. It starts to affect your interactions at work with people. It starts to affect your interactions with the person. And it actually starts to become a self-fulfilling prophecy in a certain kind of way. Because you're not just focusing on the fact that he didn't respond to a text. It's going through this filter of what? Imminent disaster. So, and then the other thing, so you have all that going on. And that's piling up on you, and the anxiety's raising. And there may not be much you can do about this, but there is one thing that you can do something about. Because the other thing that will come in here, the other part of the filter is guilt. Now let's talk about this for a minute. You got a real fear. Something horrible could happen. He could wind up in jail. It could even be worse than that. They could wind up dead, right? There's a real fears. But then in addition to that, you have this filter of, I'm a horrible parent, I'm a horrible wife, I can't believe this happened to me. What are our friends at church going to say? What's my mom going to think about this? Right? All that is also layered on top of this. And that second part of the equation is something that you can do something about. The first part, it's very disingenuous for me to stand up here in front of you and say, don't worry about your loved one. Don't worry about it. Because you guys know that that's BS, right? But I can stand up here and tell you is, don't worry about what the Greek chorus thinks. Remember whenever she said that when she was speaking tonight, she called it the Greek chorus. The little chatterboxes who all want to have an opinion. And all want to put their perfect pictures on Facebook, right? Because here's the reality of what that looks like. This is the reality of the perfect picture on Facebook. Okay? And we see that, and we see her with her lovely little baby, and we don't see the mess all around her. And we think to ourselves, man, what have I done wrong? What have I done wrong? I had this conversation with my wife this weekend. And we're going for this walk, and she's talking about so-and-so, and she's saying all this stuff, and we're sort of in this like debriefing on how we should raise our children, and we're kind of like, what could we have done different? And we're in this comparison thing. What did they do versus what did we do, right? Because she's talking about this girl who has these pictures on Facebook. Do you follow me? And I literally went down the road with her until I said, like, we have no idea if that's the reality of this girl's life. Do you follow me? We have no idea whether it's the reality of this girl's life. There's no reason to believe that these images actually indicate anything other than this, a staged picture. Now, I am on a personal campaign to put the most ridiculous parts of my life on Facebook. Okay? I have a thing that I do on Instagram where it's called Perfect Family. And it's always like us in the minivan just screaming at each other. Okay? Because my thing is it's such BS. And if you're dealing with active addiction, you got enough going on in your life to really, really worry about, than to worry whether or not you stack up with so-and-so. However that looks. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right. So as the anxiety gets cranked up, guys, as you start to go through, you're going to start to experience physical symptoms. I don't know how many people in here have gone through this, but your heart rate increases. You start to experience headaches. How many people have experienced a sleepless night? Right? How many have experienced like 3 or 4 in a row? How do you feel at the end of like that period of time? You feel awful, right? Hungover. You feel like you're not really all there. Everything is hard throughout the course of the day. Depression and anxiety can set in. The impact is significant. So, what can you do? We've talked about this before, and we're going to open this up for discussion with everyone. You can start working on anxiety. Let's just talk about anxiety and worry as if they're one, in a preventative way. You can start with preventative measures, and these are just suggestions I have. One of the biggest things that I'm a proponent of is a routine. A morning routine and an evening routine. Can you get up early enough where you're going to be able to kind of ease your way into the day a little bit? Maybe say some prayers, maybe do some readings. Anybody have any suggestions, or anybody feel like they have a morning routine that they would be willing to share with the group? Anybody got anything going on? Yes?
Yeah, meditation in the morning. And so like a lot of people think, oh, what is meditation? I can't sit still, I can't keep my mind clear, or whatever. I like to listen to Deepak Chopra and the one that they're doing right now, Oprah and everything. Meditation doesn't have to be, it can be with music, it can be just a chance to clear your mind, and when you hear a thought come through, and you say, okay, and you just go on to concentrating on your breathing. But it helps to center your entire day in such a more energetic way. And I did want to say something. If anyone in here is looking at their loved one who has an addiction in a negative way, like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, the more that we put that energy out, they're receiving that energy and
Yeah.
can shift it into seeing them whole, seeing them happy,
Yeah.
seeing them in a different way, feeling them in a different way.
Trying to avoid that pit of despair, right?
Yeah, not projecting it.
Yeah.
Not projecting it to the person too. The
Yep.
energy is really important what we give out.
So getting up early, meditation, maybe some guided meditation, or just listening to something in the morning to get yourself going. Anybody else have any other suggestions? Yes.
I find journaling along with meditation and reading very helpful.
So journaling's a big deal. If you can get into a good journaling habit, you can get progress out of that. I firmly believe that. Suzanne, were you?
Other than reading devotionals and prayer, we personally many years ago started, my husband and I, listing at least 5 things we were grateful for every
Yeah.
morning that happened
Yep.
the day before.
So five, a gratitude list. Yes, ma'am.
Now, mine was recommended by my doctor. It's worked out because a year and a half ago, with my son's addiction, I get stressed out so much, I had no hair.
Oh, wow.
It completely fell out. And he told me to exercise first thing in the morning. I am not a morning person for that. But because all I did was cry, he said when you're on the treadmill and you're going uphill at 5 speed or whatever,
Yeah.
you can't cry.
Right, right. You can't breathe. You can't cry. You're just gonna go. Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
That helped.
Yeah. So exercise. If you get into like other things, exercise, yoga, right? Do a little bit of yoga. How am I doing? Right? What? So do yoga. Anything that you do that's fun, like tennis, basketball, anything like that. Another thing is being around other people. We talked about this. Somebody brought up the idea of support groups. People said Al-Anon, Nar-Anon, favor groups. Being around other people. We are designed, we are social creatures. If you can find other people to be around and you kind of make yourself show up for that, you benefit in ways that you don't even know. The number one cause of depression is not serotonin deficiency. There's actually no connection between serotonin and depression. It was never proven. It was actually the pharmaceutical companies that rolled that out. Surprise, surprise. The number one connection is loneliness and isolation. People don't know why. For some folks, it will work if you're taking medication, so keep taking it. But the idea that it's automatically because you have low serotonin has been disproven. It's 100% isolation and depression.
Not necessarily so much for the relatives, but I just finished Sam Quinones' book recently.
Oh, okay.
And he said the first buddy of addiction is isolation.
Isolation's a big deal. And remember, when you're dealing with this, the one thing that you're going to feel compulsed to do is isolate yourself. You're actually going to feel like you don't want to be around people. You don't want to run into people. You don't want to go to this group. You don't want to go shopping. You don't want to be around anyone anywhere. Isolation will drag you down. It'll drive you down. There's nothing wrong with needing support. A lot of people need support. These are just different statistics. We tell ourselves, there's something wrong with me if I have to go talk to somebody. We tell ourselves there's something wrong. How could I go to one of those support groups? Well, the truth is everybody could use a support group, to be honest with you. Everybody could use a support group. And we also know when it comes to contentment, when it comes
to a support group.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even know you were here, Bill. You've been here the whole time?
Yeah.
You were back. I didn't even see you.
I was hiding so you could talk about her.
Oh, okay, all right. Have fun at your support group.
You can cheat on Rich, too.
Yes. So there's actually a formula for contentment. They call it happiness. A better way to think about it is contentment. And when they survey people around the world, what they find is it's pretty predictable who's going to be happy, who's going to be content. And you guys may know people like this. Have you ever known anybody who just always seems okay no matter what's going on? They just seem like they're content. There is some of it is what you're born with. Some people are born grumpier than others. About 50%. I mean, we've all known a grumpy person, right? Just grumpy. Just grumpy. So about half of it is how grumpy, the person's born. That kind of thing. About 10% depends on your circumstances. Now, when you look overall, so that's what you guys are dealing with. If you're dealing with a health care issue, if you're dealing with financial issues. But about 40% is under your control. When I tell people this a lot of times when they're dealing with a loved one going through addiction, a lot of folks walk away thinking that I'm full of crap. Because they say, only 10% is affected by my loved one's addiction. What I'm telling you is that you can take action on any given day to improve your mood. And no matter what's going on with your loved one, let's take addiction out of the table. Let's say it's another chronic disease. Let's say it's something else horrible like cancer. Or let's say it's something else horrible like terrible financial conditions. You can do things on any given day that will improve your mood. And that's called voluntary control. Okay? So let's talk about what that might look like. The first thing is you can try to redirect your thinking and choose your response to any given event. And this is rational emotive behavior therapy. It's a lot of also cognitive behavioral techniques fall into this. What you have is you have an activating event. This is something that happens. Maybe your loved one doesn't return a text message. And you have a belief about that event that leads to an emotional consequence. What would be a belief about the text message that would lead to an emotional consequence? They don't love me. Or what about even more immediate? He's using again. What about he's using again? Okay, so no text message means he's using again, creates sadness, anger, despair. The idea of rational emotive behavioral therapy is you dispute this belief because you just truly don't know. So you tell yourself it could be because what? His phone died. It could be, or maybe I really shouldn't even be trying to figure out what's going on. You dispute the belief, which leads to a new outcome. Do you guys get that? It's kind of like what you said about projecting out the worst case scenario or projecting out the negative scenario where it almost can become self-fulfilling prophecy. If I think this way. So those ideas. Here are a couple other things that you can do. This acronym PERMA. These 5 areas, people tend to feel better if they're engaging in these 5 areas. P stands for pleasure. Do something fun. Now, let's understand the difference between a fun and an exciting activity, okay? A fun activity is whatever, like, it doesn't have to be skydiving. Let's get that clear, all right? Just something fun. Go to the movies. Go play miniature golf. Do something for yourself. The E stands for engagement. Try to find something that you love to do that whenever you're engaged in it, you're 100% immersed in the project. I don't know what it could be. Knitting? That's what mine is, clearly. Well, I mean, what could it be? It could be adult coloring books. It could be woodworking. It could be volunteering somewhere where when you're volunteering, maybe you're volunteering at a homeless shelter, and when you're there, all you're doing is you're concentrating on the people you're helping. You're 100% engaged. The R stands for relationships. Quality over quantity. Okay, this isn't about trying to get as many friends as you can on Facebook, right? What it is, do you have good friends in your life? Do you have a couple people that lift you up? And, maybe even more importantly, do you have a couple people that lift you down or push you down? And what can you do about some of these toxic relationships? I can give you an example. I always give the example of the toxic relationship. When you're dealing with addiction, the classic toxic relationship is your family member or your friend who calls, and when you call and you get on the phone with them, the first thing they do is, I'll tell you what I would do if that was my kid. Click. You don't need that person in your life. Meaning, this can be spirituality. What do you believe about the world? Can you get in touch with there's more to the world than what you're dealing with? And A stands for attitude, your response to any given situation. All right, let me bust through some of these. The free 3. 3 things that have been shown to improve your mood on any given day. Go outside. Get outside. This is a fact. Go outside, you will feel better. I walk around the building all the time. If you can get out into nature, that's even better. Laugh. Laughter actually raises chemicals, feel-good chemicals in your brain. You will improve your mood through laughter. I don't know. You can find all kinds of things to laugh at today. You can go on YouTube. Oh, man, my son sent me this hilarious thing. It's called Nature Walk. Nature Walk. Go on YouTube and look up Nature Walk. It's PG-13. Don't worry, and you will guarantee to laugh at this thing. It's freaking hilarious. So laugh, and then music. I prefer, right now, my genre is like late 90s gangster rap is kind of where I'm settling. All right? But whatever you're into, whatever it is you're into, and if you engage in those, it literally will raise your mood on any given day. Now, I'm throwing out all these suggestions. We have a couple more minutes. Does anybody else have any suggestions for the group on things that they feel like improve their mood or improve their outlook on any given day? Anybody want to throw out any other suggestions?
Prayer.
Prayer, absolutely. Prayer, for sure. Anyone else? So the thing about this, guys, is none of this is going to change if you don't actually do something. Like if you leave here tonight and you go home and you don't do any of the stuff we talked about, I promise your mood will not change. And if you do it only one time, your mood probably won't change. But I would challenge you that if you focused on this, the free 3, for 6 weeks, I guarantee that your mood will be different. I'm not saying that your loved one will be in rehab. I'm not saying that your loved one will have 6 weeks clean. I'm saying that your mood will be different. You physiologically will be different. It may not be 10. On a scale of 1 to 10, you might not be at a 10. You might only be at a 5, but you're going to be better. If you're at a 3 now, you're going to be at a 5. If you're at a 5 now, you're going to be at a 7. But if you don't do this, nothing's going to change. Nothing's going to change. Guys, I know what you want. I know what everybody in this room wants. You want your loved one to be in recovery. I get it. I want that for you. I want that for you. But you got to understand, at a certain point in time, you also have to turn your attention to yourself and say, you know what? I've done everything I can right now about this situation. I've done everything I can. I can't do anything else right now. I'm going to focus on my mood and my outlook. That kind of thing. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question, but it's going to shift into something else. I need to know, because we're all parents and grandparents and everything here. When you have an addicted child who's in their 30s and you have a grandchild that's under that person, or several grandchildren, right?
Yeah.
And they're totally unaware of what's going on. They're inebriated to the point of whatever, and this child has nobody.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know some scenarios present day, because when we were in Tucson, I did call CPS and everything. They investigated and they said, it's not so bad.
Yeah.
We've got so many worse cases than you.
Yeah, that happens here too.
And so I didn't do that here at all.
Yeah.
I just intervened to way I could, and also kept my boundaries. I helped the child only.
Yeah.
And then finally, I just, it came to a head. She kicked me out, said, I want to take care of my daughter the way I want to do it. It's some kind of competition, she thinks. And then the granddaughter stood up and yelled at her. But I said, okay, I'll be out in 2 days. So I left. Okay. I got a place. I took care of myself.
Yeah.
And I said, never again.
Yeah.
But that child still, and she also took her out of school.
So we would say, when in doubt, try to call. That's what we would say. You're probably going to get a similar response to what you got when you were in Tucson. Some people will, in a scenario like that, some people will try to maintain, I'm just going to say it straight, they'll maintain a facade with their child so they can stay connected to the grandchild. They'll kind of like play a game themselves. I've seen people do that. But it's very, very difficult, because now you have a whole other party. How old is the kid?
She's 10. And
Okay,
then
she's
the
getting...
school called, and they got, you can't be out of school, and then she's a woman, a homeschooler. She couldn't take care of herself. Finally, I just left, and I left it all, and I said, God.
And that will come to a head.
She did send the child back to her dad, because she realized she couldn't take care of it.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
And she did come into FAVOR. She did get sober for 6 days, and it was an amazing experience. It
Okay.
was really a happy experience.
So what you're doing is working then, and to a certain degree, it's twisting it a little bit. The problem is sometimes this is like you're just trying to move the needle on recovery the best you can. Very difficult situation. Very, very difficult. All of it, though, you try to apply some of these principles to. I wish I had a better answer for that. I wish I had a better answer for all these scenarios. So... all right, guys, we're going to wrap it up for this evening. Thank you for being here tonight, all right? Next week, we'll have a regular group. Just circle up the chairs, and it'll be an open share. If you like the Wild Wild West, talk about whatever we want next week. You won't have to put up with me and my agenda. Thank you for being here tonight. If you need any additional information, the best place to start is out front at this desk. And we also have our emergency on-call cards. Take one of those, and you can call and you can get support for whatever situation you're dealing with. All right. Otherwise, if we can, guys, we get a moment of silence for those still suffering with this disease and for the family members brought into this no choice of their own, followed by the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Have a good night, Facebook.